Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored with Steve Taplin.
Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored, where tech leaders drop the filters and just tell it like it is. I'm your host, Steve Taplin, a serial technology entrepreneur who's launched 30 companies, had 20 of those fail, but scaled 10 of those to success. And I turned that roller coaster of a ride into my book, Fail Hard, Win Big. And this is where I teach you how to turn failure into your greatest competitive advantage and how custom software played a defining role in every win. Now I'm the CEO of Aidentified Technology. We're a software engineering firm based out of Scottsdale, Arizona. Our niche has been resources throughout Latin America. Now we've also started hiring US-based engineers as well. And today we are joined by an industry veteran who has been 25 years in the financial services space across data, across digital transformation and software, who is now the Chief Product Officer at AI Identified, Steve Marshall. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. Happy to be here.
Now, Steve, I mentioned this. You are our first Chief Product Officer on this podcast as we're on episode 133. I was excited as heck to have you on because at the end of the day, when I can roll back to every software project, past and present, that I see having failures or setbacks, it's because product and technology are not aligned. So excited to hear your viewpoints. And if you would, please take a few minutes and walk our listeners through the journey of your career.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me. So, I've been lucky to do a number of different things. And actually, I went to film school. I wanted to go to Hollywood and make movies, and just was enthralled by this idea of sort of telling stories and taking people on journeys, and worked its way out. And much to my parents' happiness, I decided to sort of come back to the real world. And I decided if I was going to do that, I was going to go back to school and learn what I needed to learn. So that's when I went into finance, got my master's degree in business, got the CFA, started working at large banks, in sort of a private equity and strategic investments role. But eventually I really gravitated towards data. At that time, I think, I was at State Street Corporation. They had started a new division around this idea of harnessing all the data that was coming off of the millions and billions of dollars that they were servicing and trying to draw insights from that data. And that really interested me. It was back to sort of that idea of telling stories with data. And so that's when I sort of caught the bug of product development and innovation with data. And I moved on. I was at that company for a long time. I moved down to New York and did that for Bank of New York for a while, and then decided to make the plunge into the startup world a couple of years ago, and no looking back. But I'm still doing that same thing. I'm still helping people find answers and through data and find those aha moments and make their lives better and tell some interesting stories along the way.
Well, as a serial tech entrepreneur, there's nothing like the experience you get with startups and the ability to be involved in all aspects of its success or failure.
That's right.
So tell us about AI Identified.
Sure. Well, Aidentified is an AI-powered prospecting application for financial advisors and wealth managers and other sort of relationship-driven professionals that helps them identify, qualify, and ultimately convert high-value prospects. So we do that by essentially fusing about 260 million U.S. consumer profiles with about 75 million U.S. professional profiles into what we consider to be a true 360-degree view of an individual. And then we enrich that with timely money in motion triggers and liquidity events, everything from an IPO to a real estate transaction to even a mention in the news, all of which are sort of signals about somebody that can be very helpful to a financial advisor when they're looking for new prospects and to grow their book of business. And then because we have all this information about where people work, where they have worked, where they live, where they have lived, we can infer a lot of things about relationships and the strength of those relationships. We know if two people worked on the same board over a certain period of time, or two people are neighbors, we can start to infer that they know each other. So what that does is help our clients understand the warmest and most efficient pathway to get to somebody. So if I were to identify an ideal prospect for myself and I was able to understand the exact right time to reach out to that person because they've had some sort of a wealth event or some sort of a trigger that would indicate the time is right, I can also use our relationship mapping to understand the best way for me to get a warm introduction, because nobody likes cold calling. The data shows it's not all that effective. Everybody has to do it to a degree, and that's the problem really we're trying to solve.
In the wealth management space, are there a lot of companies doing this?
More and more, actually, it's getting fairly crowded. No one really kind of owns the market yet, although we're doing our best to get there. But more and more people are understanding, or more and more companies are understanding the role that AI can play in this, and how much of a problem prospecting is, and why essentially why it's a good idea that problem be solved. There's a lot of ways that we can remove the pain of that, both from the advisors and ultimately from the prospects. Nobody likes getting cold called either. So there's a lot of people in this space. We think we've got the better mousetrap, but we've got some good competition out there as well.
Well, let's face it, with the wave of AI, everyone's trying to figure out the best uses, how to do it. With 95% of AI projects failing, it takes smart companies to have a niche and figure that out and take it not just to 90%, but to 100%. So that's exciting. Tell us about some current projects you're working on.
So we're doing a lot of interesting things right now. If you think about our platform as it is, there are a lot of different ways that an advisor can come in and start to search for people based on attributes and wealth and income and location and things like that. What we want to do is make that even easier, and we're building something that we call the IPP, or essentially the ideal prospect profile, which is our take on the well-known, classic ideal client profile. So rather than you having to come in and tell us, and search by attributes that you believe your ideal prospects share, why don't you just share with us a list of your clients, and then we'll use AI to actually determine who we think you should be talking to, both based on those attributes that they share, but also who is actually having wealth triggers right now. Who are the people that you might have the warmest relationship to? So that rather than coming in and using our tool as a research workstation, ultimately what we're going to do is be serving it. We're going to be spoon feeding people to you proactively, so that you can spend less time searching and more time closing business and helping your clients.
Awesome. So, give me your viewpoint here from a chief product officer perspective. When I look back at every software project I've seen fail or succeed, past and present, it often comes down to product and the technology teams working well together. Tell me your view of the chief product officer role and how you work with CTOs and their teams.
Right. Well, that's a great question. I think uh, the CPO role, there's a lot of interesting aspects of that role. I mean, I think I spend a lot of my time actually making sure that the right people are talking to the right people about the right stuff at the right time. And that seems like a relatively straightforward, simple thing, but it's actually really hard. People love talking about the wrong stuff.
Anyone in the software world is nodding their head saying, we get it, we get it.
I mean, it amazes me how willing people are to talk about the right stuff, but with the wrong people, or to talk to the right people, but about the wrong stuff, or at the wrong time. And so, if I could just get that straight every day, I would. I'm ahead of the curve. So, just making sure that people are communicating, almost over communicating all the time, and that everybody has a common sense of what the mission is. What are we trying to do? And I think AI has changed the landscape in terms of how much of an awareness of that concept our engineers now have, because they're much more focused on the why and the outcome and where are we headed than they are necessarily about the journey and the mechanics of how to get there. Because they've got tools now that sort of give them superpowers when it comes to engineering and coding and so on and so forth. So my job is to make sure that to use another sort of bad analogy, it's a little bit like if I'm a vegetable gardener, I can't do what the plants do, but I am responsible for producing vegetables. What me and my partner on the technology side, our CTO Dan, do is that we make sure that we have the best seeds and that we're providing them with the best environment we can. So proper sunlight, all the nutrients. You can run with the metaphor as long as you want. And then a big part of that also is making sure that we're removing weeds and pests and distractions. And then the most important thing we're doing is getting out of the way and allowing them to do. We've set them up, we've given them all the things that they need, and then let them do their thing. And I think as long as we're in constant communication with our eyes on the prize and we all have a common North Star, that tends to be the thing that wins the day for us.
So any organization, leadership culture starts at the top, works its way down. How do you and your CTO work together, and what best practices have you seen?
Well, it's interesting. This is the first time I've ever worked for a completely remote organization. So that has required me to develop, muscles that are a little bit different than the ones that I've used in my past. And
Yeah, you have to work a little harder to create that culture in the remote environment than you do in person. There's tons of benefits to it, but that's one of the downsides.
absolutely, I mean, you have to work. Sometimes it feels like you have to work 10 times as hard to get sort of half of the benefits from a cultural standpoint. Because if you have a disagreement with somebody or there's tension, at the end of the call, you can just hang up and you're going to go, you know, you're going to go on to the next thing, and that feeling is going to sort of fester, right? And
Yeah.
there's no bar next to the office where you can go have a beer and hug it out, or there's no break room where you could say, listen, I'm sorry I said that. And so communication becomes incredibly incredibly important. The way that I work with my CTO, we both love to be hands-on. We're both incredibly curious. He ultimately loves to build things. He's a coder. He's a very creative guy. So the worst thing that we could do for him is to take him sort of out of that mode and make him sort of manage the team. That brings him too far away from the product and away from what he loves to do. So I think making sure that we find the balance between him being, actually being in the zone and creating code, but also being our chief architect and making sure that the whole thing is kind of coming together, and making sure that he and I are all. I mean, he asks me for my advice, and I ask him for his advice all the time because we offer different perspectives and we've got different backgrounds, and that's always been the key to me to success is making sure that we're and plus we like each other, and that certainly helps.
It does. It does. I was, Steve, recently in a client meeting where their roadmap was blocked. They weren't making progress. They brought my company in to help. And at the end of the day, the crux of the issue was the CTO and the CPO were not talking well.
Yeah,
And they were both frustrated with each other,
yeah.
but there was not good communication. So making sure to have the right leaders to get across that barrier is definitely key.
Yeah, it's incredibly, and no surprise here. Oftentimes the backgrounds and approaches of a CPO versus CTO are different. They tend to be sort of different types of
Yes.
people. So making sure that each of you aren't necessarily expecting the other to be just like you, and respecting the differences, but understanding that you both kind of have a role to play in this, and it's really up to the two of you, obviously with the help of your teams, to drive success for this organization. It's really important. So, if that's one of the most important relationships for me at this organization, and I work every day to sort of nurture it and make sure that we're communicating all the time.
So tell, if you would, describe your product and engineering team, how many people you have. You already said you're a fully remote company, but how you guys, the work model you guys have found to work here.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been around for about 7 years, and so there's been trial and error. I haven't been here that whole time. I've been here for about 2.5 years. But most of our engineers are, despite the fact that we're remote, most of our engineers are co-located in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. We have some offshore resources, but as we're growing, we're sort of transitioning those closer to home, onshore, to have more control over culture and quality and speed and things like that. Product side, we're relatively lean. We've got two lines of business. Ultimately, we've got a software as a service business and a data as a service business. So we've got two people that look after those lines of business, and we have obviously a big investment in UX and design. And we meet with the engineers all the time. So we obviously have our back end and front end stand ups every morning. We're in constant communication with them. The way that our engineering team works, again, it's autonomy and communication. So make sure everybody understands the mission, make sure everybody knows what's expected of them, and make sure that they have what they need to be successful, and then let them do their work. And also make sure that they know that if there's ever an issue or a question, that they have to come back to us, because the worst thing to do is to keep going in the midst of uncertainty, only to realize that you've gone far too far down a wrong road, and you have to turn around and come back. We're a curious bunch. We love building stuff. There's a lot of sort of hackers in our midst, and we want to make sure that we are always nurturing that. At the same time, we have a schedule. We've got a roadmap. We have to ship product. It's got to be good product. It's got to be QA'd. It's got to be fit for purpose. So essentially, that's how we work together. We're a close knit group. I wish we saw each other in person much more often, but I think it's working pretty well, and we're growing, so that's great. More people are seeing what we're doing and want to be a part of the team, and that's great.
So when I and from my vantage point, and if you ask any tech leader about AI, you'll get different answers. But from my vantage point in the software world, and one of the biggest things it's done is the ability to go from idea to prototype very quickly without having to spend months and or even longer to create MVPs. And certainly on the engineering side, there's efficiencies that it's brought. But the most game-changing thing I would say outside of those efficiencies is the ability to get to prototype quickly. Tell me from your vantage point on the product world side, how AI has evolved things for you and your team.
Well, AI, I mean, it's in our name, right? AI identified. So we better earn that, right? The pressure's on us to deserve that name. It's in everything that we do. Everything from the way that we fuse those profiles together to the way that we predict things like wealth segmentation, and we use it in the back end as well as an accelerant to some of the engineering and coding I mean, ultimately, what AI is doing is helping us help our clients. We're surrounded by data, and people have networks that they may not even be remotely aware of. So it's incumbent on us to help them by using our tools to help them not only find people, but to understand that they actually know a great many more people than they do than they know that they do, and many more ways for them to have introductions to those people than they might be aware of. For us, it's really just about moving faster. It's about reducing friction. It's about reducing waste. It's about reducing the time to value, both for our clients in our tool, but also for them with their clients. You have to use data to reduce the friction and the amount of time between when you meet somebody and when you can deliver value to them. At the end of the day, that's really what AI is doing for us.
So as a software product leader, what's the biggest challenge you're facing now?
That's a great question. I would say almost always the biggest challenge for me is focus. I think it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason, right? And I think it was Steve Jobs. I don't know for sure, but I've heard this quote attributed to him. Either way, I like the quote, which is that, focus isn't, it's a paraphrase, really, not a quote. Focus isn't about deciding between an idea that you don't want to do and an idea that you do want to do. It's about looking at a bunch of amazing ideas, all of which you absolutely love, and choosing to say no to 9 of them so that you can say yes to one of them. And that's incredibly, incredibly hard. And there is no shortage of amazing ideas that we see every single day. They come from us. They come from our team. They come from our salespeople. They come from our clients. They come from our competitors. They come from the market. And sometimes they'll come from, somebody will be really excited about something that they heard in their most recent client conversation or a book that they just read or something. And I want people to get excited about new ideas. I never want to sort of dampen that. But on the other hand, to some degree, we have to shut out the noise and say, we're saying no to these good ideas because we are focusing on these, which are the right ideas at this point. It makes some people mad, right? I mean, sometimes people call me Dr. No because I'm saying no all the time. And at first that rubbed me the wrong way. And now I kind of wear it with pride because
Dr. No. Well, let's face it, technology is evolving so quickly now with AI and what it's bringing to the table. There's so many shiny objects to chase out there.
That's right.
And every time you dive into one, it may get you 70% there. And you're like, oh, if it only did this and this, and then a competitor's product will have a new release that'll include a feature. I mean, it's hard to keep that
It
focus.
is. It's the hardest thing there is. It's not just us keeping our focus, but reminding our stakeholders around the organization about that focus and doing that in a way that doesn't discourage them from continuing to be excited about new ideas. So we have a great roadmap. We've got a very long backlog. It's growing all the time. As I say to people all the time, I'm always grateful for ideas. I want as many of them as I can get. But at the end of the day, it's our ability to execute that matters the most. And that's what I need to stay focused on.
So as we're now in Q4 2025, what is the biggest business or technical outcomes that you're focused on by year end?
Well, we're really excited about this ideal prospect profile that I talked about, and really what that is it's an enabling technology. So if we no longer need you to come in and tell us who your ideal people are, but we instead know that about you. I mean, think of it a little bit like Spotify for advisors, right? Like, show me more of these, show me less of these. If I can start sending you people, then it opens up the spigot in terms of ideas for us. There are lots of of advisors who outsource a chunk of their back office or their marketing or website development to service providers. And guess what? They wouldn't mind offloading their prospecting to those service providers too, because you naturally sort of outsource things that you don't feel are core to your business or things that you don't necessarily like to do. And again, everybody understands the importance of prospecting in financial services, but nobody necessarily likes to do it because it's
Right.
hard, it's tough, the numbers aren't great. So if we can actually empower those service providers to solve some of that problem for their clients who are the RIAs, the advisors of the world, then that's a big opportunity for us. And so we're exploring ways to do that with our data that again relies on who are the existing clients now, what do they have in common, and then ultimately who do they know and who these other people know, and so that we can start to then the phrase is spoon feed. Don't give me a list of 10,000 people, give me a list of 2 or 3 people a day that I should act on, and tell me why, and make it easy for me. And so those are the things that we're really looking forward to making a big impact on by the end of this year.
And, you look at the sheer amount of data out there. You mentioned pre-show that you have 260 million profiles that you guys have. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? What's kind of slowing you down or standing in the way of getting there tomorrow versus end of year?
Well, when you think about Identified, we're a typical big data company. We have big data, and not just the number of profiles, but if you think about just the data around how many people each of them know and all the different variations of that, we're talking about terabytes of data. So the challenge that we have sometimes is that there's almost nothing we can do that doesn't have some massive implication downstream across all of that data. So there's no such thing as a small little tweak in our pipeline, right? There's always a ripple effect. Nothing is simple. Everything that we do is hard. And I love that about it, but it's also important that we recognize that. So, I wouldn't say anything is necessarily blocking us, but when you're dealing with a data set of our size, and we rebuild that data set every single night. I mean, because people are changing, people are moving. The whole, the United States demographic, it's a living and breathing thing moving around all the time. So we are constantly rebuilding this thing every night, and that's a fragile process. So we have to preserve it. We have to protect it no matter what. So I think making sure that we're prioritizing and doing the things that we think are going to drive the most value without causing a ton of complexity. When I started this business, I thought that, the more complexity, the better, and the more features, the better. As I've been at this for a while now, I'm realizing, well, actually the opposite is really true. It's about removing things. It's about removing friction. It's about simplifying, not about making it more complex. And so, I think just given the complexity of our data set, it can be a little bit of a challenge for us, but I think we've made great strides recently.
So after 25 years in product related roles at large financial services companies, what's some brutal lessons now that you wish you would have known earlier in your career?
There's a couple of them. I think, first of all, that probably what I just mentioned about more features is not better. It turns you into a feature factory, and you can sort of take your eye off the ball. So making sure that you are removing friction and that you're actually really solving the problem. That's one of them. Another one is essentially understanding what that problem really is. If you think about a patient going to a doctor, they talk about their symptoms. The doctor's forced to not think about the symptom, but think about, well, what is the symptom pointing to and what's the root problem? And so that's what we have to do, right? We listen to symptoms, but we can't treat symptoms, although the urge is always there. We have to try to figure out what's the real problem that we're solving, which sometimes can seem at first to be completely different than the symptom. So, I have a finer appreciation for that, for sure. And then I think, the last thing I think I'd point out is that I think I believed when I started that the chief product officer was the person who was responsible for having all the ideas. And that is definitely not true. I mean, if that were true, my company would be in big trouble. I'm responsible for finding the ideas and finding them wherever they may be, and I need to be really creative about that. And then I become almost harvester of those ideas and an editor of those ideas, and then figure out how do I actually productize those ideas. But everybody's a source of ideas. Everybody from actually, I have an interesting story about this. In a prior role about 10 years ago or so, we were working on a mobile application, and we were struggling with how to effectively surface a feature on the front end of the application. And so we would have these design sessions, and everybody would have their little Post-it notes. And, we decided to invite everybody on the team. And there was a sort of a shy, young back-end data engineer who I'm not sure I had ever even spoken with before. And what he drew that day on that little Post-it note completely changed the nature of our product. And the lesson for me that day was, you never know where the idea is going to come from. I do know that if you're relying on your engineers just for engineering and coding, you're probably getting about 10% of their value. So if you're not getting ideas from them, you're missing something. But I'm not sure a lot of people necessarily invite somebody like that to a meeting like that. That was a big lesson for me. I'm not responsible for coming up with the ideas, but I am responsible for finding them, and I have to be incredibly diligent about finding them.
I think that's a great way to summarize the chief product officer role. Is you don't have to come up with them, but you got to find them and
That's right.
cultivate them.
That's right.
Steve, thank you so much for getting uncensored with us today after 133 episodes, our first chief product officer. And I was so excited to have you because that is such a critical role to the success of a product, of a company. I really appreciate you sharing your viewpoints, your wisdom, and what you've learned along the way. Before we wrap, Steve, what's your no BS advice for product and tech leaders out there trying to build, scale, or even just survive in these interesting times?
Wow. My advice would be, don't pretend to know things that you don't know. If you are aware that you don't know something, go out and get that information, no matter how hard it is and no matter how long it takes. But if you're building products based on things that you think you know but you don't know, you're going to have a challenge. So really be very diligent about understanding the line between what you know and what you think, or what you know and what you don't know. It's taking me a long time to figure that out, and it helps me.
Great advice. Thanks again, Steve.
Thank
That's
you.
it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin. If you enjoyed the show, go ahead and hit subscribe. If you didn't, well, we'll just share it with your competitors. Might be the edge they're looking for. Remember to fail hard, win big, and always build what matters. See you next time.
That's a wrap. Another great episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun doing this show. I love talking with great tech leaders. As a side note, if you're interested, check out my new book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is the story of how I built 30 companies, failed on 20, and turned 10 into multi-million-dollar wins. The common thread with all of them was custom software. Also, if you need software development help out there, my company, Aidentified Technology, we deliver world-class software development engineers out of Latin America. We have a solid track record of helping companies launch better products and faster. Thanks again for listening. Appreciate it and appreciate you.